Hi friends, I'm Samara. We are doing a series right now about virtue. And we're going to go over 10 different virtues. Last week we talked about self-discipline. This week we're going to talk about compassion. And compassion, this is how the dictionary defines compassion. It says a sympathetic consciousness to other people's distress and a desire to alleviate it. Let's break that down and make it simple. That simply means that you feel somebody else's pain and you want to help them get rid of that pain. Now, a perfect story that came to me about compassion from the Bible is about the Good Samaritan. And I'm sure you know the story of the Good Samaritan, but let's recap it. Jesus was talking to some of his followers, and a lawyer spoke up and said, "Jesus, how do I inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Well, what does the law say?" And the lawyer said, "Well, the law says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said, "Yeah, that's right. You got it. If you do that, you will inherit eternal life." And the lawyer said, "Well, who exactly is my neighbor?" So Jesus told him a story. He said there was a man on a road traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he came across some robbers, and the robbers beat him up. They took his clothing, they took his belongings, and they left him on the road to die. Well, a priest started walking down that same road. When the priest saw the man in distress, the priest crossed to the other side of the road, did not help him. Then a Levite was walking down that same road, and the same thing. When he saw the man in distress, he crossed to the other side of the road and did not help him. Then a Samaritan came along that road. He saw the man in distress. He got off his horse. He helped the man. He bandaged his wounds. He put the man on his horse, took him to an inn, cared for him overnight. But he had to leave for work the next day, so he left money with the innkeepers. He said, "You use this money to take care of that man, whatever he needs. If you spend more, I'll pay you when I get back." It says that the Samaritan was moved with compassion for that man in distress. So Jesus asked the lawyer, which one of those three men showed compassion? And the lawyer said, "Well, it's the man who helped, the man who showed pity and helped the man." And Jesus said, "That is right. Now you go and do the same." Now there's two things to note about that passage. The first thing is that the man who was robbed was a Jew, and the man who helped him was a Samaritan. And in those days, the Jews and the Samaritans did not get along. They didn't socialize together. They were like enemies. It was like two different cultures and they were enemies. And so for the Samaritan, he looked past their differences and he just saw a man in need and helped him. That's what we're supposed to do too. And the second thing I thought was interesting is that the lawyer who asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" the lawyer knew what the word said. He was just looking for a way around actually doing what the word said. In the book of James, it says that we need to be doers of the word and not just hearers of the word. We have to do what the word says. Okay, remember, we're talking about compassion. That is feeling somebody else's pain and doing something to relieve their pain. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit to a time in our history called the Civil War. That's when our country, the United States of America, was fighting against itself. The North was fighting against the South. And there was a woman who really demonstrated compassion, and her name was Clara Barton. Now, Clara Barton had a heart. She felt pity for the soldiers who were fighting. And let me just read this to you. It says, "Ever since the dreadful war has begun, Clara Barton had been worried about the men fighting at the front. She knew that wounded men were left lying in the field until the battle was over. She knew that only then were they collected and taken to hospitals. Hospitals far behind the lines. She knew that if they survived this delay, the rough jolting of the wagons might well cause their unbound wounds to open. She knew that they often bled to death before they reached the hospital. Clara had compassion on these soldiers, so she did something about it. She went to the general of the army and she said, I have found a van. I have found nursing materials, bandages. I have people who will help me. Let me go into the battlefield and treat these men on the battlefield. The general said, no, absolutely not. It was not allowed at that time for women to be on the battlefield. And Clara persisted. She persisted. She just kept asking him. She made her case over and over to the general. And the general said, there's nothing more that we can do for these soldiers. But Clara said, I can do more for these soldiers. So finally she wore the general down and she was allowed to go into the battlefields and treat the men who were left lying on the ground. And oftentimes she did help save them, and they didn't have to wait until they were transferred to an army hospital. Now this gained her a nickname in the Civil War. The soldiers called her the Angel of the Battlefield. They thought they were left there to die, and then they would see this woman bend over them and start bandaging their wounds or helping them with their pain. They called her the Angel of the Battlefield. Now, Clara Barton went on to form the American Red Cross, and you may have heard of the American Red Cross. That is a story about compassion. Clara Barton, she empathized with somebody else in their distress, and she did something to help them relieve their pain. Compassion. Think about your life. Think about maybe a time when you've helped somebody else who was hurting. Or think about a time when maybe you didn't help them, but you want to change and you want to help them in the future. Compassion is a very good virtue to have. And virtue it helps us, but it also helps other people when we live and walk in virtue. So remember that today. Compassion. Look for the needs of other people. And if you can meet that need, then you need to do it. Thank you for watching. Have a blessed day.